Hello, my name is Mike, and, well, this is a bike. Parts of a bike anyway. In our last episode, we talked about the upgrades that were required to make your V92, the early bikes, much more reliable. They did have some transmission issues, so we bought an engine on eBay knowing that the transmission was shot, and, well, we did this to it. We made an enormous mess out of it. But we did make some progress. If you watched the last episode, you saw that we identified the cause of the problem was a bearing that worked its way out of the case because the retainer screws broke. And it caused the entire shift set to move over, therefore causing damage to the shift control forks and to the different gears and so forth, which is basically what was going on. So we're going to put a new set of gears in it. We're going to do a few other small things to accommodate those new gears. And, well, anyway, watch the previous episode. It's the easiest way to figure out where we're at. Anyway, this is part 2. We're going to finish the mods. We're going to put this thing back together. So stick around. Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least 2 cool wheels. Something else I forgot to mention in the previous video and holds true for any of the videos I'm doing on this topic is the actual Polaris instructions can be found in the description below this video. There's a link to the actual printed instructions. So guys, don't just follow along on my video and hope that it works. Look at the actual instructions, get out your service manual, which is also available online somewhere. And it will show you step by step and have all the part numbers you need to do these upgrades. Since our last episode, well, we got the holes cleaned up. We went ahead and tapped out the lower hole here so that it will accommodate a slightly larger screw. We cleaned up the threads in the upper hole, and we went to the hardware store, and as you can see, they're different sizes, but that's fine. It's actually this bigger one will probably do a better job. So we've got that portion of the problem cleared. We can go ahead and put a bearing and a lock plate on it. I've checked all my bearings. All my bearings are in good condition. There wasn't a lot of metal in this one. I never did find the heads of the screws that broke off. So my speculation is when this thing failed, the first thing the owner did was go to change the oil. And the screw heads probably came out with the oil change because I've looked all through the cases. I cannot find the screw heads that broke off. So I dug into my parts bin and I gathered up the parts we're going to need for this project. There is the new retainer, and there's a specific way this has to go in. It's actually stepped, and I'll show you that in a minute. There's my new bearing, and there's those stepped shift rails that I talked about. If you have a 99, the holes are slightly smaller, so you have to use these or get your old ones machined. You can see, here's the shift rail that came out of it, and it's, well, it's a little bigger diameter. So you'll need to use these in order to use the upgraded shift forks. So here's my upgraded shift forks and shift drum. You'll notice that, the drum is entirely different. So all these components are different. None of them are mix and match. You got to make sure you do all the stuff. The output shaft, well, let me show you the gears themselves. So these two here are the original set. This is my main shaft. This is my counter shaft. Next to them are the upgraded versions. This is the new main shaft. And you see that the gears are increasing in size as they go this way. They're not kind of all staggered like they were in the original sit. And you can see now why I talked about the gears that are different diameter not being able to be picked up by that speed sensor. And then same thing with the counter shaft. And again, the gears are stacked a little bit differently. But other than that, the shafts and so forth are all going to be the same, with one exception. The diameter of the output shaft, and this is our output, and this is where our belt drive sprocket would go, is a different diameter. This is slightly smaller. The updated one is slightly larger. Now, the bearing bore is the same size, so you don't have to change the bearing to accommodate it here. But you do have to use a different sprocket, and you also have to use something called it's either a collar or a sleeve. Well, that's this gizmo here, and this thing goes in the case. Well, I can't show you because it's on the other side. Anyway, this goes in the seal. So this has to be replaced as well as the drive pulley. So it's going to get a new collar. It's going to get a new drive pulley. It's going to get a new nut. All these components are specific to the upgraded output shaft. I also talked about the star wheel. If you look at these two components here, you'll see that the original one, well, the little nubs on it, or gear teeth, whatever you want to call it, they're not quite as pointy as the ones on the new one. And because they're a greater depth, let me see if you can see. So by comparing them, you'll notice that the new one protrudes out significantly further. This is why we have to modify that plunger I talked about. So we're going to chop off a little bit of plunger just to be able to accommodate that much more travel. It's not a lot. It's like 1/4 inch, 3/8 maybe, something like that. And I also talked about this lubrication jet here. Well, it squirts straight out in this direction towards the camera, and that's not going to hit the gears right. So part of the upgrade is this is threaded into the case. We're going to take it out. We're going to replace it with this group of components. So basically this part right here threads in, and then there's a hollow banjo bolt. Spin that off real fast. That holds this, they call it I think they call it a collar, but it's actually a jet. So it's hollow, and you can see there's a tiny opening there. And when this is in place, it's going to sit in there like this, and it's going to squirt the oil down into the gears. Instead of coming across this way, it's going to be going down into the gears where it's needed. So we need to install that. Once that's installed, we'll go ahead and put our bearing in. And then once that bearing is put back in, we can actually start putting this thing back together. Now, looking at the other side of that oil jet, that's it right there. Anybody see a problem with that? Well, it threads into the case. There's this, gear in the way. In order to get this gear off, I have to undo the torsional compensator, which is spring-loaded and stuff. This is our balance shaft, by the way. The other end of our balance shaft, there's a counterweight to help offset vibration, and it also drives our oil pump. We don't necessarily have to take the shaft out, but we do have to get this gear out of the way. In order to get that gear out of the way, I've got to take my flywheel / rotor off because, well, the trigger wheel's in the way here. So in order for me to remove this, I got to take this bolt off here. I need to replace this anyway. This is the older, smaller type of rotor. And so every time I do one of these, I always upgrade the charging system. I've got a larger diameter rotor and a larger diameter stator that I'll put in the cover when I get a cover for it. But while I got to take this off, now is the time. Let's go ahead and upgrade it so that the charging system on this bike will be upgraded as well as the transmission. Now I've run into this before where, because it's such a small hex, damn thing's stripped out. This is actually an American size, and I don't know if this is American or metric. I don't know if it's a 6mm or 1/4 inch. The 6mm fits in there, but it's got a little bit of play. The 1/4 inch fits in there if you beat it in with a hammer. So I was using the 1/4 inch because, well, it got a little more bite when you got to beat it in with a hammer. But I had one bike where I could not get that out. I just wallered that hole out really, really badly. But the good news is I found a way around it. You see, this portion here is almost identical to this portion here. It's still got the oil passage in it. The real difference is at this end here, instead of a tiny little jet in the end, this one, come off of here, has got a threaded hole. So there's the difference. So what I ended up doing was I actually used the existing jet since I couldn't get it out, and I drilled it and I tapped it, and I was able to install this collar and this banjo bolt to make it work. So if you run into that problem where that sucker doesn't come out, and you saw I used heat, I used the torch and a bead on it, and used the torch and a big breaker bar, and finally got it out. I got lucky this time. It was getting ready to strip. Look at the angle. That son of a gun right there, just about ready to waller that hex out. So I got it out just in time, so I'll be able to use this. But if you run into that, drill it, tap it. As long as you make sure you get all the damn metal out, that's going to be the tricky part. You'll have to remove the oil pump, and you'll have to get into that passage from the other side of the case and blow it all out. Make sure you get all those metal shavings out. I don't have to worry about it on this one, but there you have it. Now, going back together with this gear and that balance shaft, well, it can be a little tricky because, see, you can't just jam this thing into a bearing in any position. You got to orient it so that the weight clears the crankshaft weight. So it's got to be turned at a certain angle. But then at the same time, you also have to line up some timing marks on this gear. So you see there's 2 dots there. And where is it? This other gear, it's got dots. They're on the other side. We'll bring it around and we'll get those dots lined up with these dots. But a third challenge is the fact that, well, if you look at this gear, this is what they call a split gear. And actually, this gear in relationship to this gear has some springs built into it so that when there's no gear in between them, the spring kind of shifts them off to the side. So what you do is, got a little hole there. I can put like an Allen key or something like that in there, and I can use a screwdriver to wedge against this corner here and kind of scooch that gear over, jam an Allen key in there, and it'll hold those gears lined up long enough to reassemble all this stuff. The reason they do this is to take, so that if you have a spring-loaded gear here, it takes the play out of these gears. So there's not this kind of back and forth slop. So when you go to accelerate the bike, it's not going to have a surge. And then, of course, the torsional damper on the other side helps absorb the thrust of the pistons so that by the time they reach the clutch, the rotational force is nice and smooth. So we'll get all this put back together, I think. We'll try anyway. couldn't see the dang dot, and, well, I was off. So I marked it with some white paint. I can see the one with the dot on it. It's real hard to see when you don't have very good lighting, and, you know, the shadow of these gear teeth here makes the other teeth look like they have dots on them. Anyway, I've got to move this gear 4 notches in relationship to that gear to get it timed right. So I got to kind of take it apart and shift it a bit. So bear with me. I'll get it timed right. I couldn't see the stupid dot. So the whole alignment thing is you're fighting against spring tension, so you've got something in here. But when you go to put this shaft in, I forgot to mention there's a blind spline. So this shaft with the counterbalance on it can only go in one location in relationship to this gear. And in order to get that balance shaft in, it has to be rotated to a certain angle to clear the crankshaft. And then you also have to make sure that the dots line up. All right, so my dots are lined up like they should be. It was off by 4. It is now where it belongs, and we can go back to our reassembling. My bearing is shoved into its opening. You know, it's not a real hard fit. Push it in with a socket. The nozzle and the banjo bolt are also installed. And when you go to install them, you want this flat surface here at the top. You get some light here. You want this flat surface at the top to be parallel to the engine case. So you just stick a screwdriver in there and that holds it in place while you're tightening the banjo bolt. I put a bit of blue Loctite on it. And then the nozzle itself is, I don't know if you can see, it's right there, a little opening there, and it's going to squirt directly into the gear set, which is going to be in this opening here. So that's completed. Now, before I put the retainer and the 2 screws back into the shift drum bearing, I want to point something out. This can be installed one of 2 different ways. It can go like this, or if you look at the other side, it can go this way, and you'll see it's stepped. And that's because, depending on the case, some of them, this bearing was actually recessed below the level of the case. And if that's how this particular one was machined, you would want this side down against the bearing to hold it inside the case where it belongs. This particular one, the outer race of that bearing is flush with the case, so I would not put this side towards the bearing. I would put the flat side towards the bearing. Okay? And of course, blue Loctite. Now I have a new problem. I noticed when I had the old shift drum in my hands, when I moved it around, can you guys hear that? There's something inside. There's not supposed to be something inside. And what it is at this end, which is the end that goes against this part of the case, well, there's a little short shaft that bearing rides on. Well, the shaft has come out of the case, and it's now inside here. I'll never get that sucker lined up so that it could come out. And in order for me to put it back together, I've got to have it because, well, the new shift drum needs one. And it goes in, where's the hole? I got gears in the way. It goes in this hole right here. So I've got to find a shaft that'll fit in that hole there, or I've got to figure out some way to get this bearing out of here and being able to free that shaft up and get it out of there. That's kind of a weird one. Don't think I've seen that before. But we'll get it out. And there's my little shaft that I need. It's not hot. There we go. And I got to looking. If you look at this surface here, this is where that bearing was. And you can see there's some like wear marks. So when that shaft came out, that means my shift drum, well, it was wobbling around here. So not only did that shift drum walk and move, it also moved in relationship to this. So we're going to go ahead and get that shaft back in there. We'll probably put some Loctite or something so it sticks to the case better. We don't have to worry about that popping loose again. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and shorten the plunger and the plunger sleeve. I have it clamped in a vise. I use Scotch-Brite kind of as a cushion to keep the jaws from damaging this. It's got to stay smooth so it can, slide easily. The nice thing about the Scotch-Brite is it'll protect it from damage and it doesn't want to slip. If you've got a piece of rubber, that would work just as well. So we're gonna snip about 1/4 inch or so off of here, and same with this piece. And once those are snipped off, we should be able to install them and put our shift drum back in. So we'll get that knocked out next. And you notice I've covered this up. I don't want metal shavings all, peppering things, and we don't need more problems, that's for sure. Now I'm going to use this to cut off precisely 1/4 inch. How do I know it's exactly 1/4 inch? Well, I turn on my calibrated eyeball and dial it in just so, and I'll get exactly 1/4 inch off of there. Plus or minus 3 inches. checklist just to make sure we're ready to go ahead and put the updated gear set in. Well, Boss is machined. This one's a 2000, it's already been machined, but if it was a 99, we would have had to, clearance this. When the gear goes in, you'll see why. Okay, check. New bearing retainer, and new shift drum and star wheel. Check. Updated oil dispensing jet nozzle thing. Check. And modified plunger to accommodate the new star wheel. Check. So we're just about, whoa, what's this? Small sliver of metal. Check. Uh-oh. Well, in case you guys don't know what this little sliver of metal is, this is a ring. Yeah, I put plastic bags on my pistoles to protect the rings. It's not really very much protection. I need to come up with a leather boot or something to protect them. And this particular job, well, I jostled it around a lot more than I usually do. I fought a few things that I normally don't have to fight too much. And, well, this one piston just kept wanting to smack the deck. And I suspect that's the one that's got a broken ring. Which means that, well, I'm not going to be able to completely reassemble this engine on this particular video. I'm going to have to find a ring, get it ordered. But we can go ahead and put the gear set in. We can clean the surfaces. We can put the case halves together. And we can at least button up the case. It can be drying while I source some rings. And then there's a few more things that we want to do once we get the engine assembled that I want to talk about from the outside after we put the case back together. So we'll drop those gears in. Alright, there's our new gears, and this one here, I think it's fifth gear. It's the one that comes loose from the rest. It's got a little bearing in it. This is an interference fit where it goes through the bearing. It's not a real super tight one, but you usually have to kind of tap it down into place to get it to go all the way down, and then we can put the rest of the components in. We're going to put the counter shaft in first, and this is the gear. You'll notice it's the largest diameter of the gears. This is the one that needed that boss to be clearanced, because if you don't clearance it, then it'll grind. It's not good. So we're going to drop that bad boy in there. Okay. And I still have to get this other one down. Get in there a little better. Now it makes sense, right? You can see, had we not clearanced that, it would have been a problem. And that's how I know that in 2000 they knew that this set of gears was eventually going to end up going in these cases. And then all we have left is the other half. Ooh. Back on there. Little bugger. There we go. So I slipped the fork into the collar on the gear set and then aligned the peg with the slot in the drum. I had to lift it up slightly, but now you can see that the hole for the shift rail lines up. And I'll do the same for the other one that goes on this set. So you got two shift forks that go on this side, and then you have one that goes over here on the counter shaft. Okie doke. I got my shift rails in place. I got my shift forks in place. Yes, I had to loosen up the oil pump, and I had to take these oil distribution tubes out. They fit with just an O-ring. Once you take the little bolts out, you just kind of wiggle them and they'll work their way out. Anyway, they were in the way. I just couldn't get in there and get this without lifting the oil pump up a little bit to sneak it under. Typically when I do these, there's a ton of metal in there, and I've already got the oil pump out, and I'm either rebuilding it or replacing it because of the metal content. But in this case, I didn't really have to. I thought I could get by without removing it, but not quite. Anyway, we're back together up here, and we're going to go ahead, we're going to go through the gears, make sure it has all the gears it's supposed to have before I go through the trouble of putting the cover back on. Okay, so right now we're in neutral. I'm going to spin the input shaft. This would be our drive sprocket. I'm spinning the input shaft and it's in neutral. It's not going. Now we're going to shift it in first gear. Now it's in first. Rotate the clutch side, and now we're turning in a nice low gear. Again, that was first. Go and click this way. Now we're in second. Let's go second gear again. Should be second. And there we have second. Third. Fourth. It's going considerably faster. And last but not least, fifth gear. And there it is. All the gears work. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. We've got all the upgrades installed in the case. We got to put the case back together. I've gone through that in other videos. We got to clean these surfaces off real well. When you go to set this case half down on here, you want to make sure you protect the main bearing. There's a bushing, a bronze, I think, bushing in this half of the case. So either get a protective device. There's a part number for it in the service manual. I could never find one. So what I do instead is I get a really long bolt, and when I go to put this cover on, I start one of the bolts there, so that end of the case will be held stable as we push this end of the case down over this bearing surface. And we'll get all that done in the next episode. I've got to hunt down a ring. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the old like button and the subscribe button, and there's like a little bell button. There's buttons. Okay? Thanks for watching.